Today we'll be looking at the PSLE question from 2013. One machine took 70 minutes while another took 100 minutes to print the same number of copies of a newsletter. The faster machine printed 6 more copies of the newsletter per minute than the slower one. Question A. The slower machine completed the job at 1 p.m. At what time was the printing started? Question B. What was the total number of copies printed by the two machines? So for the first part of the question, we note that the slower machines took 100 minutes and the faster machine took 70 minutes to print the same number of copies of a newsletter. There was no mention of whether the printing started at the same time for the two machines. Nonetheless, our focus will be on the slower machine. So since the slower machine took 100 minutes to complete the job and the job was completed at 1 p.m., the time that the printing started on the slower machine would simply be 1 p.m. less 100 minutes. And 100 minutes would be equivalent to 1 hour 40 minutes, and that will be 11:20 a.m. So the printing started on the slower machine at 11:20 a.m. Visually, if we look at the clock face, the end time would be 1 p.m. If we go backwards, we reduce it by 100 minutes or 1 hour and 40 minutes, we will get 1 p.m. less 1 hour becomes 12 p.m. 12 p.m. less another 40 minutes, we'll get 11:20 a.m. So that's the answer. Part 2 of the question asks for the total number of copies printed by the two machines. Once again, we note that the faster machine printed 6 more copies of the newsletter per minute than the slower one. So after 1 minute, the faster machine will have printed 6 more copies. After 2 minutes, the faster machine will have printed 12 more copies. So we need to find out how many more copies did the faster machine manage to print after 70 minutes. If we look at the bar diagram, the green bar above represents the total number of copies printed by the faster machine after 70 minutes, and the blue bar below represents the total copies printed by the slower machine after 70 minutes. The difference would be the additional copies that the faster machine managed to print within the first 70 minutes as compared to the slower machine. So, to find the additional copies of newsletters printed by the faster machine after 70 minutes, we simply take 70 multiplied by 6, we have 420 copies. After 70 minutes of printing, the faster machine managed to print 420 copies more than the slower machine. So if we look at the block diagram, we have replaced this with 420 copies. So since the faster machine stopped printing after 70 minutes, and both machines printed the same number of newsletters, therefore the slower machine must have printed 420 copies in the remaining 30 minutes. So the difference in number of copies will be 420 minutes, and the difference in time required to print this additional 420 copies on the slower machine would be 100 minutes less 70 minutes. 100 minutes coming from the time required by the slower machine to print the same number of copies of newsletter as the faster machine. So therefore, since the slower machine printed 420 copies in 30 minutes, the total copies printed by the slower machine would simply be 420 divided by 30 multiplied by 100, and we'll get 1,400 copies. 420 divided by 30, we get the number of copies printed per minute by the slower machine, and since the slower machine printed for a total duration of 100 minutes, so we take the printing speed of the slower machine per minute multiplied by 100 being the time that the slower machine was printing, and we get 1,400 copies. The question asks for the number of copies printed by both machines. So since both machines printed equivalent number, we can just simply take 1,400 multiplied by 2, and we get 2,800 copies. So the total number of copies printed by both machines is 2,800.